Welcome to the class, students. In this session, I would like to give a lecture on what is literature. It's an introduction to the literature. Literature is understood in multiplicity of ways. It is a body of written and oral works like novels, poetry, or drama that use words to stimulate the imagination of the reader and provide him with a unique vision of life. The underlying assumptions here is that a literature is a creative work, global form of expression that addresses the spiritual, emotional, and intellectual human concerns. However, this idea is from the 14th century. In the 18th century, literature was viewed as well written books of an imaginative or a creative kind. Good literature is believed to demonstrate artistry and to have the power to raise questions and debates, provides new points of view, and let the reader expands his understanding to himself and to the whole world and even refresh his spirit. So, literature in any literature is any factual, imaginative, and creative work about people's life and what they have done in their lives as an achievement, what they have believed and what they have created or have thought to create. Moreover, literature is a multitude of works that are written in books, newspapers, or articles, spoken, acted, filmed, sung, or drawn as cartoons on televisions. It should not portray one view about the human life, for instance, only the positive side of their life. Literature should portray different and real visions to the human life, whether it was positive or negative, because this implies a balanced and a viable representations of the human life, realities, and existence. Furthermore, literature can be lived through different varieties of media, audiovisual, oral, and so on. It is an expression of culture because it conveys the human knowledge, beliefs, and behaviors. Many uh, authors and critics and linguistics have puzzled over what literature is. One broader explanation of literature says that literary texts are products that reflect different aspects of society. They are cultural documents which offer a deeper understanding of a country or countries. There are many definitions is using different perspectives, but it keeps it in the same vein. Literature simply means anything that is written, timetables, dialogues, textbooks, magazines, articles, and so on. For instance, if you want to buy a car or a washing machine, you will probably want to see the literature about it. If you are a doctor and you are going to do specific surgery to a person, you will certainly see the literature about the surgery. Even in advertisement and marketing, because you will not buy a product without having an idea about its literature. Furthermore, we can divide literature and this large mass of materials into two groups: informative literature and imaginative literature. Informative literature basically deals with the informations, facts, explanations, history, etc. It tells us about the real world. For instance, a biography about a famous person like Nelson Mandela, Prophet Muhammad, Mahatma Gandhi ji. Its main purpose is to give an idea and to offer knowledge to the reader. In the other hand, imaginative literature aims to arouse thoughts, imaginations, and even feelings. Its authors express ideas and feelings in an artistic way. He would not convey facts, but he basically tried to communicate with the reader by his emotions and feelings in a real artistic way, and it's for the sake of art in general. Literature, in its broadest sense, is any written work. Etymologically, the term derives from Latin uh, litera, which means letter, writing formed with letters. Although some definitions include spoken or sung text, more restrictively, it is writing that possess literary merit. Literature can be classified according to whether it is fiction or non-fiction and whether it is poetry or prose. It can be further distinguished according to major forms such as the novel, short stories, or drama, and works are often uh, categorized according to historical periods or their adherence to certain aesthetic features or expectations. Taken to mean only written works, literature was first produced by some of the world's earliest civilizations, those of ancient Egypt and Sumeria, as early as 4th BC, taken to include spoken or sung text. It originated even earlier, and some of the first written works may have been based on a pre existing oral tradition. As urban cultures and societies developed, there was a uh, um, developments in print technology allowed for literature to be distributed and experienced on an unprecedented scale, which has culminated in the 21st century in electronic literature. So, why study literature? Literature have varied over time. In Western Europe, prior to the 18th century, literature as a term indicated all books and writing. A more restricted sense of the term emerged during the Romantic period, in which it began to democrate imaginative literature. So, contemporary debates over what constitutes literature can be seen as returning to the older, more inclusively notion of what constitutes literature. Cultural studies, for instance, takes as its subject of analysis both popular and minority genres in addition to canonical works. Literature helps us to be realistic and more mature and wise and humane. It also helps us understand human values, sentiments, interests, and problems. It brings us closer to other cultures, human values, different nationalities. It gives the reader aesthetic pleasure. So, Matthew Arnold, he says, literature is all knowledge that reaches us through books. Another great personality, Thomas De Quincey, all that is literature seeks to communicate power, all that is not literature to communicate knowledge. There are many people like John Morley. Literature consists of all books where moral truth and human passions are touched upon a certain largeness, sanity, and attractiveness of form. What's the nature of good literature? Yes, it should be originality, life enhancing, creative, craftsmanship, universality. So, many forms can be seen in the literature: poetry, Poetry is a form of literary art that uses aesthetic and rhythmic qualities of a language to evoke meanings in addition to or in place of prosaic meaning. Poetry has traditionally been distinguished from prose by its being set in verse. Prose is cast in sentences, poetry in lines. The syntax of prose is dictated by meaning, whereas that of poetry is held across meter or the visual aspects of the poem. Prior to the 19th century, poetry was commonly understood to be something set in metrical lines. Accordingly, in 1658, a definition of poetry is any kind of subject consisting of rhythm or verses. Possibly as a result of Aristotle influences, poetry before the 19th century was usually less a technical designation for verse than a normative category of fictive or rhetorical art. As a form, it may be predate literacy, with the earliest works being composed within and sustained by an oral tradition. Hence, it constitutes the earliest example of literature. Prose. Prose is a form of language that possesses ordinary syntax and natural speech rather than the rhythmic structure in which regard along with its measurement in sentences rather than lines. It differs from poetry on the historical development of prose. Um, Richard Graff notes that um, uh, novel, a long fictional prose narrative. Novella, the novella exists between the novel and short story. And short story, a dilemma in defining the short story as a literary form is how to or whether one should distinguish it from any short narrative. Apart from its distinct size, various theorists have suggested that the short story has a characteristic subject matter or structure. These discussions often position in the form in some relation to the novel. Then drama. Drama is literature intended for performance. So, literature as a human activity, literature can never be an end in itself. It is an ever a means to that final end. It is the attainment of man's eternal destiny, a means with law subordinate to higher laws. In conclusion, literature, um, when we um, talk about the term literature in its broadest sense, uh, is any written work. Um, some definitions include spoken or sung text. It is writing that possesses literary merit. Literature can be classified according to whether it is fiction or non fiction, and whether it is poetry or prose. It can be further distinguished according to major forms such as novel, short stories, or drama, and works are often characterized according to historical periods, um, or their adherence to certain aesthetic features or expectations. Thank you very much for listening.